Hi everyone and welcome to a new series on the CBI channel. In this tutorial series we're going to be creating a Django and React dashboard app. And in this series I'm going to show you how we can use the data stored in our backend to create different kinds of visualizations in our React.js frontend using various types of charts. Now in this first video, we're going to be focusing on setting up our Python Django backend. And that backend is going to handle all of the data that we have inside of our application. Now to create our Django backend, we're going to be following 6 steps. We're going to start by creating a new folder for our project and also specifically for the code of our backend. Then we're going to be installing virtualenv and creating our virtual environment. Once that is done, we're going to be installing Django and Django REST framework and creating our Django project and a separate app. And then we're going to be making some changes to the settings.py file and also include some URLs. And as the final step, we're going to be migrating our database and start our server so that we know that everything is working as it should. Now for this tutorial, I'm using Visual Studio Code as my code editor. And you can see in the terminal right here that we're going to be using Python version 3.12.3. But I'm sure that with previous versions, you will also be completely fine to follow along. Now the first thing what we want to do is create a new folder for our project. So in this case, on my desktop, I'm going to right click and create a new folder. And I'm going to be calling it Django React Dashboard. And now I'm going to go to Visual Studio Code, click on File and then Open a folder. And in there, we can go to the desktop and select our Django React dashboard. Now, of course, your folder can be anywhere on your computer, but in my case, for now, I'm just going to do it from my desktop. Now, in this series, we will, of course, have a split between our Django backend, which is going to be handling the storage and everything related to data. But we also will have our React.js frontend, which is going to be more the pages that the user is going to see. So to split these codes, I'm going to create a separate folder by clicking this icon, which is completely dedicated to my backend. And this is going to hold all of our Django code. Now the next step is installing virtualenv and creating our virtual environment. Now, if you've watched my previous Django and React tutorials, you know that I always like to create a virtual environment to host my backend code in. Now, the reason that I like to use a virtual environment is that I can use different versions of different packages in different projects. So let's say 2 years ago, I've created a Django application. Then at the time, we probably were in Django version 4.1. But in the meantime, new versions of Django have been created. And in my latest applications, I probably want to use the latest version. However, I don't want to update my original version because maybe they've changed something and my old application will most likely break because it doesn't follow the rules that the new version has. So to circumvent this, you can create a virtual environment in your application and store the packages that you need for that specific application in there. And then if you start on a new project or you want to use a different version in a different project, you can simply install a different version in that virtual environment. Now, installing virtualenv is very simple. We can just do Python-m and then pip install virtualenv. So we're going to go over to our Visual Studio Code, and on the top, I'm going to create a new terminal. And then we're going to be cding into our backend folder, just so that we are already there. And then I can do Python-m and then pip install virtualenv. Now you can see that for me, this requirement is already satisfied because I already had it on my computer. And we can now create our virtual environment by doing Python-m and then venv and then the name of your virtual environment, which I'm also going to name venv. Now the command is now done and you can immediately see that inside of our backend folder, we now have a new folder called venv, and that is going to represent our virtual environment. Your virtual environment has a few different subfolders called include, lib, and scripts. Now you can already see that in lib, it is going to store the packages that we're going to be using during this project. So later on, when we install different packages, you will notice that it will be added inside of this environment so that we keep track of exactly what we have in here. To make sure that we can work inside of our virtual environment, we actually need to activate it. Now, to get into that environment, we can do venv/scripts/activate. And once that is complete, you will see venv or the other name of your virtual environment at the start of the folder path. So right now we know that we are working inside of this environment. The next task on our list is actually installing Django and Django REST framework, because of course we need to install Django to actually start using it. Now, right now I'm on the Django documentation on the page on how to install Django. And if we scroll down a little bit, you can see that we need to do Python-m and then pip install Django. So I'm going to copy over this command right here. And inside of our terminal with the virtual environment activated, we're going to be pasting in that command. And the installation is now complete. And when we go to the virtual environment folder and then to the lib/site packages, we will now see a bunch of different packages that are added to our virtual environment, such as Django, but also some supporting packages that we need to make sure that it all works. Now, another package that we're also going to install is Django REST Framework. And Django REST Framework is going to help us by creating APIs. And in the end, that's going to make sure that from our front end, we can retrieve data from our backend by exposing certain pieces of information through a web link, or called a web API. Now, if we scroll down a little bit, you can see that we install it by doing pip install Django REST Framework. So let's copy that over and add it inside of our terminal right here. And now we also have REST Framework added to our virtual environment and our project. So now let's make sure that we actually have a Django application and we can create a new project by using one command inside of our terminal. So inside of our terminal, we're going to do Django/admin and then start project. And after that, we can put in the name of our project. And in this case, I'm going to be calling it dashboard. Now, after dashboard, I'm going to put a dot. And what this will do, it will make sure that all of that code is going to be in one folder and that it does not create a subfolder. And actually, one of you guys commented that this was a better way of doing it because I manually removed the folder in a previous video. And this should make sure that we only have one folder to begin with. So let's see if that actually works. And now when we go on the left-hand side, you can see that we have a backend and then a folder called dashboard, which represents our Django application. And we have no nested folder in there. So that actually works very well. So thank you very much for that comment. Now inside of our dashboard, we have a few files called the settings.py file with our project settings. We also have a urls.py file with the URLs of our application and then some other supporting files as well. Now, next to a Django project, we're also going to be creating a new app because the way that Django wants you to handle the coding is split up the different parts of your application into different apps. So let's say that I want to create login functionality. I would probably all bundle that code together in an app called users, and then for other parts of my applications, develop that in different separate apps. Because in general, it's always a good idea to separate different functionalities. So in this case, I'm going to be creating a new application inside of our project, and I'm going to be calling that data. Now to create this new app, we can do python manage.py and then use the command start app. And after that, the name of our application. Now in this case, I'm going to call it data because everything data related will be in here, but you can give it whatever name you would like. So let's click enter and see if we now have a different folder. Now on the left-hand side, we can see that we have indeed a new application in here with a few files in here as well, such as a models.py file, which can later on store our database models and also views, apps, and admin. Now we have created a new app inside of our project, but we still need to let our main project know that this app is part of the overall application. So we're going to go into our dashboard and make some changes to our settings.py file. Now, the first thing that we're going to do is under the installed apps section, we're going to tell them that we have a new app, and that app is called data. So we can just type in the word data and it will then know that the data folder is part of our overall application. Now, next to that, we need to make another change to our settings.py file because in the Django REST framework documentation, you can also see that we need to add REST framework to our installed apps. So I'm going to copy over this REST framework. We're going to go to our code and underneath data, I'm also going to add REST framework. So that's also been entered correctly. Now, another thing that we need to do to make sure that everything from data is going to be correctly absorbed inside of our application is add the URLs that we're going to be creating for data in the urls.py file of our dashboard project. To realize that, we first need to create a new file in our data folder, and that file is going to be called the urls.py file. And going to be very similar to the content of a urls.py file in our dashboard project. So we can just copy over all of the content from the urls.py file we already have, and then paste that inside of the one inside of data. And we're just going to get rid of the full explanation because that's not really relevant for us. And for now, I'm just going to leave the URL patterns completely empty because we've not developed any routes yet. But it's already nice to have this set up for the future videos. Now, what we want is we want to include all of the URLs that we're going to be defining inside of our data project and include them inside of our main project right here. Now, to include the URLs in this file, we need to first, next to path, also import include. And then we can add another entry inside of the URL patterns that are going to contain all of the URLs that we have in the urls.py file. Now, for the path, we're just going to leave that empty because the paths will also be iterated from the urls.py file that we will populate later. Now, all that we need to do is here mention that we want to include something and then do some parentheses and say that we want to include the data.urls. And what this command does, it's going to go to our data folder and then to the urls.py file, and it's then going to include everything that is in here and put it in here. So when we do that in the future videos, we will have it sorted. So just like this, everything is complete. Now also in this file, I'm just going to get rid of all of the comments because we don't really need it, and then save the file. Now as a last step, we're going to be migrating our database. Currently in our backend, you can see that we don't have a database file yet. And also we've not really defined any models or any structure of our database yet. We're going to be doing that in the videos to come. But we can already migrate our database so that the default structure is already there. So to do that, we can use two commands. The first one is Python-m manage.py and then make migrations. And actually, we don't need the -m. It needs to be Python manage.py make migrations. And now we can do Python manage.py migrate. And you can see that a bunch of standard migrations have already been applied. And these are just standard tables that Django uses in the application that we don't need to specify ourselves, but that just happens automatically. Now you will also see that a new file has been created called db.sqlite3, and this is actually our database. So right now our database has been successfully created, and in the next videos we can use the models.py file to define some schemas of our own. Now the last step that we're going to be taking is starting our server and see if we get the right end result. So we can start the server by doing python manage.py and then run server. And you can see that it has done a few checks and there are no issues identified, and we can find our server at this URL. So I'm going to Control and click to follow the link. And when we go there, you can see that our install has worked successfully and that our Django application is now ready for use. And that is actually all for this video. In this video, I showed you the steps to take to successfully set up your Python Django backend. In the next video, we're going to continue and set up our React.js frontend and also make sure that that backend and frontend can communicate correctly by setting up the Django course headers. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like and subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.